Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm here just for a short time. My reason for coming here is to remind you that with the movement, we started it in 66, 67, and we are still want to make sure we keep it alive. I'm going to sing two verses of Stand Up for Jesus. Stand up for Jesus, ye soldiers of the cross. Lift high your royal banner, it must not suffer loss. From victory unto victory, his army shall he lead, till every foe is vanquished, and Christ is Lord indeed. Stand up for Jesus, stand in his strength alone. The arm the flesh will fail you, ye cannot trust your own. But under gospel armor, each peaceful God with prayer. When you cause of danger, we never wanted there. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That is the army song. That is Revolution song.
When we watch the children play, remember that it was me and you.
In early 1967, as Great Britain was finalizing its plans to create the three-island associated state of St. Kitts, Nevis, and Anguilla, its planners ignored the traditional hostility that existed between the tiny and poor island of Anguilla and St. Kitts, the larger and richer island located 70 miles due south. Anguilla was unlike other Caribbean islands in that it was flat, arid, and rocky, and it had no sugar plantations or agriculture of any other kind with which to sustain an economy. As a result, nobody had ever really wanted the island, and over the years, nobody, including England, had really known what to do with it. So it had been connected, as if on life support, to St. Kitts for more than 100 years. Conditions on Anguilla were deplorable. It had no public electricity, no public pier, decrepit schools and medical facilities, hardly any paved roads, and it had been without telephone service ever since Hurricane Donna made a direct hit on the tiny island in 1960. In fact, in a New York Review of Books article titled Anguilla, the Shipwrecked 6000, Sir Vivian I. Paul said that Anguilla was like a mistake, a tiny colony set adrift. It was, he said, part of the jetsam of an empire. So when Britain set February 27th of 1967 as statehood day for the trio of islands, it effectively forced the Anguillians to begin contemplating a future that all but guaranteed many more years of abuse and neglect under the heel of Robert Bradshaw, the much-hated tyrant from St. Kitts who had prevented them from escaping the backwaters of degradation and domination simply because they had voted against him when he was elected to power. And when they learned that he had held a critical meeting on St. Kitts about Anguilla's future, that he deliberately chose not to invite a single representative from Anguilla to the meeting, emotions erupted, and the islanders, led by Ronald Webster, began to stage protests aimed at convincing the Queen to undo what absolutely needed to be undone. Unfortunately, the protests went on deaf ears, and on May 30th, nearly 3 months after statehood became official, the poor but proud Anguillians decided to go it alone. Rather than enjoy freedom from Britain with Bradshaw in control of their future, Ronald Webster and a group of Anguillians barricaded their landing strip, marched to their police headquarters, seized weapons, and expelled the 17-member St. Kitts directed police force from their island. And with these actions, they sparked the world's most curious revolution.
We talked politics, and then he told me about Otlin Harrigan and Ronald Webster at Island Harbor. I didn't know the two gentlemen. I decided in January of 1967 to go to look for Otlin Harrigan or Ronald Webster. I was fortunate to meet Otlin Harrigan, and he told me that he was writing a number of articles in the Democrat paper in St. Kitts and the St. Thomas paper concerning the political injustice that was dished out to Anguilla over the years, that he got information from a man, the late Colonel Howard, who was the last administrator, English administrator in the colony, and that they had discussed the matter, and that he had felt that Anguilla would be better off keeping away from associated status that was one step away from political independence. Otlin Harrigan, I would love to make this abundantly clear. Otlin Harrigan was the man who started the 1967 revolution. Otlin Harrigan, Walter Hodge, and Ronald Webster, Collins Hodge, Alfred Webster, and myself met, and we had a meeting. We decided that we needed some place to be private, and the property at Little Dix, known as Hideaway, Collins Hodge and the owners of that property, Austin Rogers, and now the late Abraham Harrigan, deceased, give us permission to keep the meetings there.
It's like Moses going to the promised land. He was on the hill. He saw the valley from where he was, but he didn't enter the promised land. And it's the same thing with myself.
Men are not using landing craft, they're simply using the ship's boats of the frigate Minerva, and presumably there has been another island, another landing at another point on the island from the frigate Ross.
Anguilla's President Ronald Webster today sent a cable to the United Nations protesting the occupation of his tiny Caribbean island by a British task force. Here's a report from CBS News correspondent Morton Dean on Anguilla.
Activity was centered around what was a schoolhouse and what now appears to be headquarters for the occupation troops. The self-proclaimed and enormously popular president of the island, Ronald Webster, came here for discussions with the British officials, Webster bearing a central demand that Anguilla no longer be forced to associate with nearby St. Kitts Island.
Well, what would you accept? What kind of an association with Britain would you accept?
The only thing I will accept is direct association.
A direct association with Britain?
Yes.
Not through St. Kitts.
The British appear quite ready.
I believe I was called to do a job, and I was told to go and represent your people. The reason behind it is what was done was for the purpose of improving the life or the livelihood of Anguillians in Anguilla. We were all treated like slaves and third-class citizens, and we need some representation. And I believe I was called to represent my people.
Meantime, the British are interrogating a number of persons. Several American residents of the island were questioned. A representative of the Queen, upon leaving the island under duress several days ago, said that gangster elements were in control of the island. I was wondering whether, on the basis of the questioning of various individuals here today, you have anything to substantiate the charge.
The trouble has already started. What are we going to do? I know I have no protection other than the 2 weapons that I had. And they were like nothing to speak, you know. That is when I spoke to the doctor and I asked him what he can do to assist. And the doctor told me, well, you know, these things cost money. I told him, yes, I know that. And he asked if I'm prepared to purchase them. I told him, yes, if they're available, I will do so. And that is how it got off the ground.
Webster pulled me aside and he was wondering if I had any connections to get some guns, because he says truthfully they didn't have any here. And I said, well, I don't know, but I could sure find out, which is exactly what I did.
We organized a pageant show to be held in the secondary school in Anguilla. And I decided that I'm not going to allow these things to happen. And it sparked off what is called today the revolution. We did not allow it to happen. It created what you call havoc in the school that night. I had a group of people with me who were in sympathy with the situation nevertheless, and they assisted me in keeping watch and with a view of protecting. And we told the warden from Wardmo that we are not going to allow it to happen, and we'll do everything to obstruct it. And he told me that I must remember that it's the government, it's not him, it's not us. He advised me not to. I told him that whatever he does, whatever he do, would be in the interest of the people of Anguilla. And they just ignored me. And I told my boys from outside, I said, well, look, I said it seems as if we're gonna have action here tonight. I do not really want any trouble. If it's in trouble to be engaged, let me do it. But as I said, Anguillans, you know, are very excited at the time. They said, well, they are here to help. And regardless of what happened, they are going to go in. I tried to ward them off, but I just couldn't manage to keep that force back in the long. And we decided to break up the Queen Show, and we did so. We throw bottles, we throw missiles, we did all kind of things. We cut out the current, and we did everything. We stopped it, and that started off the whole.
As a result of that, Ronald and Otlin went into hiding. They didn't want to be arrested. A few days later, the governor, I think he died now, Sir Fred Phillip, came to Anguilla and tried to explain to us that we were too late in preventing statehood. During that period, the flag was raised at Government House on the 27th day of February 1967. We kept a meeting and we decided that in order to destroy the flag, we may have to destroy the building. A few days later, Colin Sarge brought me $400 EC and said that Ronald had given it to him to get me to look for somebody to do the job. A few days later, Ronald came back to me and he said, give him back in Anguilla lingo the thing that Collins had gave me. I gave him back the $400. Later that day, the late Cuthbert Brooks from Northside came to me, and he said, "Bob, I heard you all got a job to be done." And I said, "Yes." He said, "I will do it." I said, "Fine." I said, "Go Island Harbor to Ronald Webster," we used to call him Bubba, "and tell him I sent you." He went. The next morning, I went to look for Otlin to tell him what had happened. And he said, "You know, Ronald brought me Cuthbert yesterday and tell me to take Cuthbert to Wallace Way." And I did that. I said, "Well, fine. It's a question now of time." My wife was pregnant with my second son, Conrad Rogers. And on the 8th of March, 1967, when I went to the Cottage Hospital to see how my wife was, that she had delivered my second son, I came back and I passed where the ashes of the lonesome was burnt flat to the ground. As we pressed forward, late January of 1967, the date for associated status was on the 27th of February 1967. As a result of our push, organizing the people and keeping meetings, the British sent out a man called Johnson to try to persuade Anguilla we to go along with statehood. As a result of Johnson coming to Anguilla, and let me say here that I, John Rogers, delivered that letter in protest to Johnson. Bradshaw and his Minister of Education, Fitzroy Bryant, came to Anguilla, kept a series of meetings, and we rejected all what he said. As a result of that, late January, a man called Arthur Bottomley and the Deputy Prime Minister Paul Southwell came to Anguilla, and we rejected their proposal. As a result of that, the late Billy Hobart and the elected representative of Anguilla, Peter Emmanuel Adams, went back to London to see if they could renegotiate a better arrangement, because in that constitution there was local government for Nevis and there was local government for Anguilla. There was no local government for the central government, and there were sections in that constitution which had given the premier the power to null a council either in Nevis or in Anguilla. At their return, we then, with the help of Dr. Hubbard, the late Dr. Hubbard, we sent a proposal to Bradshaw outlining what type of local government we was prepared to accept. Bradshaw wrote us back and said there were no proposals before his government.
The sort of place you dream about. A tiny remote island where the sun is always shining and the sea is always blue. And yet here at any time now, blood may be shed on these glistening white sands. An army of policemen will come wading in the name of the central government of St. Kitts, 70 miles away over the sea. They say they're coming here to put down an armed revolt. But the Anguillans call it their fight for independence. And here on the island, the Anguillans are watching and waiting.
The 10th of June marks the anniversary of an attempt in 1967 to overthrow the Sir Robert Bradshaw Labour government.
We were kept down as slaves, and there were no hopes for being free.
Anguilla should never have been made a dependency of St. Kitts.
Our conditions, roads, water supply, whatever you could think of, we were terribly neglected.
The Chief Minister, Mr. Bradshaw, said for the people of Anguilla, he will give them bones in their rice and pepper in their soup. Now the people took that to be an insult.
The notion of attacking St. Kitts was the brainchild of Ronald Webster and a prominent Kittitian lawyer.
We wanted our freedom from not St. Kitts alone, but from the pressures that
The motivation to attack St. Kitts was, let's attack them first and then they won't be able to attack us.
We feel that we were not treated fairly, and we decide we definitely will rebel.
I'm a government minister, and here's somebody accusing me of being a part of an attempt to overthrow the government.
People who were normally peaceful and polite turned out to be extremely, extremely hostile and perhaps even vicious.
They were caught, picked up, and imprisoned.
State of emergency was declared, and there was a warrant for my arrest. I don't know for what up to this moment.
The plan for the overthrow of the St. Kitts government included the capture of Premier Bradshaw, the destruction of the Defense Force camp, the capture of the police headquarters, and the shutting down of the power station, all located in the St. Kitts capital of Bastia.
The people in Anguilla felt that we were very much neglected by the central government in St. Kitts. During 1967 and before, Anguilla had no electricity, no telephone. There was one line between the hospital and the out district. At East End, one home conducted a line. So if there was an emergency in East End, you had to go to that home in Mount Fortune to get a connection to the hospital, telling them that the patient or the police station. The schools, they were just one room. There was one secondary school on the island, and limited with how many kids they could take in, children, how many children could attend. There were no running water supply, a lot of privy, and I said privy, they were outdoor toilets, and many people use what we call the bush. And we were beginning to travel to other islands. Anguillans were beginning to travel to other islands. And we also had Anguillans that went to England, St. Thomas, St. Martin, other island countries. And they knew what development was. They knew what it was to have running water, indoor toilets, you know. So when they returned back home and realized that Anguilla was still under the same conditions that they left, a group of them decided that something had to be done. Fortunately for those persons, men like Atlin Harrigan, John Rogers, Mr. Ronald Webster, they banded themselves together to decide, you know, what could be done to improve the conditions in Anguilla. Well, fortunately for them that Mr. Peter Adams, who was then Anguilla's representative in St. Kitts, he was elected by the people in Anguilla to represent Anguilla in St. Kitts legislature. He was given a document informing him that the St. Kitts government was about to become a statehood within the British Parliament. And that statehood was like self-government in St. Kitts. And Anguilla, St. Kitts, Nevis, and Anguilla were going to become a part of that. Well, Mr. Peter Adams allowed Atlin Harrigan to get hold of that paper. And that is what set the revolution going. These men got together and they said, under no conditions will Anguilla go into statehood with the St. Kitts government?
They were there because they were preparing us to go
Take
into
part
this
of
is
the
one of the
statehood.
activities, like a Queen show, for us to say that we were involved in wanted statehood. So the young men and with the leaders, they went down there and they started to disrupt the Queen show. So that, because they say we are not going with St. Kitts within the statehood, so no Queen show going on. And they started to revolt. They started the revolution then. Yeah. They had, after that we had a demonstration. We had to carry a coffin, remember? We had to carry a coffin. All that was during the time for statehood, where they, we carried a coffin because they say if you go, if you join, then we'd be dead. So they carried a coffin saying Anguilla is dead.
Winston Harrigan was the one that came up with the idea about having a coffin.
Oh, it was Winston. I didn't know, but I remember going.
Yeah. You remember that that coffin? Who that coffin was?
Virginia.
Yeah, there was a young lady that was very sick, and so the coffin was Winston built, and so he decided that we must decide that Anguilla do not want to be with statehood. We do not want Bradshaw, and you must bury Bradshaw. So they planned this. They planned the demonstration, and as usual, from Island Harbor down to Sandy Hill, they had a truck running through the island, and because our parents were so involved in what was happening, they did not want. They were, they were
kind of
aged. So they ensured that we, the younger ones that were home at the time, must be part of the demonstration. So like I say, we had someone that made those placards for us every year, every day that we had to go. Mr. Petty, Calvin Petty, made the placards. And Narine and myself would always
go on the
truck or the pickup, whichever one they were. I remembered that we all gathered down by the Farrington there by the crossroad by John.
Where they have the big building now.
Yeah.
We used to meet there, and then from there we used to go down.
Walk
all the way down. We used to
with our placards.
And we used to sing a song.
We're out to build a new Anguilla.
On March 19th of 1969, after 2 years of botched diplomacy aimed at forcing the Anguillians to reconciliate with their nemesis Robert Bradshaw, Britain invaded its tiniest dependency in a military exercise codenamed Operation Calypso. The British line was successful in subduing the mouse that roared without spilling any blood, but the invasion backfired on Britain and ended as a global embarrassment for England and its Queen. To save face, the British quickly replaced its invasion force with Royal Engineers who stayed on to build the roads, schools, medical facilities and infrastructure, including a pier, an electric power station, and a new telephone system that would finally bring Anguilla into the modern world. And after a 2-year struggle, the proud but fiercely independent island underdogs led by Ronald Webster, with courage, determination, and unity, proved that the small, poor, and isolated can, in fact, escape the backwaters of degradation and domination.
The sort of place you dream about. remote island where the sun is always shining and the sea is always blue. And yet here at any time now, blood may be shed on these glistening white sands. An army of policemen will come wading in the name of the central government of St. Kitts, 70 miles away over the sea. They say they're coming here to put down an armed revolt. But the Anguillans call it their fight for independence. And here on the island, the Anguillans are watching and waiting.
The Israelis run the police force here. The police force is only at the moment 3 men. I also assist in running the defense force, which is about 250 men.
Police force,
I run the police force.
Independent because we was living a bad life in Anguilla under the foot of Bradshaw, a man from St. Kitts, and I don't know him and I don't want to know him. But I like to be independent for the day that I die, that I leave the little offspring with something. And I'll fight to the last, to the first and to the last. I will fight to the first and to the last.
Even if the British let
Get to stay independent with the open work for us to have. So give us work for us to have work.
You think you'll get work if you're independent?
I should think so. After company of people come in, they will get work to do. But
attitude built up over years of neglect, which it is very hard, I should say impossible to eradicate at this time, even with force.
Is there any danger, do you think, that if Anguilla does stay independent, other forces, other interests, perhaps criminal interests, might move in here?
There is that possibility, I know. In fact, from my point of view, there are signs of it even now.
What sort of interest?
People who are interested in gambling, prostitution, and drugs and so on. And because of the religious outlook of the people here, I don't think that they would be able to stomach this kind of thing.
From St. Kitts, whether they can join us to St. Kitts. We have proceeded, whether it is official or illegal. We have proceeded. It's our decision. We have to make our decision.
Yes, and you have to solve this and work this problem.
Then, to go back on the pressure? No!
No question.
Several days ago said that gangster elements were in control of the island. I was wondering whether on the basis of the questioning of various individuals here today, you have anything to substantiate the charge.
This is a statement that he made.
Yes.
I never made such a statement myself. And, you know, if you ask me to substantiate another man's statement, it's rather difficult.
Well, these individuals were questioned concerning those allegations about gangsterism. Anything to substantiate the fact that perhaps mafia-type gangsters are controlling this island?
When you say mafia-type gangsters, this is something very serious indeed.
Well, those were the words of representative that was on this island a few days ago.
The situation here, basically speaking, is one in which there is no legal system functioning. I think, you know, if you approach from that direction, you get a better idea of what is the case. Namely, there's a vacuum, and therefore anything goes. I think this is the answer that you're looking for.
Well, just to press the point, and then I'll stop. When you say anything goes, have mafia-type interests been operating on the island in this vacuum?
When you say mafia type, this is something, I'm not a policeman, nor am I an investigator.
Gangster type.
Gangsters? Not to my knowledge. That doesn't mean to say that they haven't been here. In view of the situation here, I think it's probable that they have, but not to my knowledge.
This is a rather ticklish diplomatic affair for the British, and their representatives here do not appear too anxious to directly answer many questions about what is going on here now and what it'll all lead to. Morton Dean, CBS News, Anguilla.
declared itself independent of the British Crown 2 years ago. At the time, nobody paid much attention because there wasn't much to get excited about. Anguilla has 30 square miles, 6,000 people, a salt pond, and that's about it. It appeared that within or without the British Commonwealth, it was doing nobody any harm or doing nobody much good. But now, today, the British have sent a force of paratroopers to occupy the island and to put the British Commissioner back in office to rule in the name of Queen Elizabeth II. Some people in London call the operation the Bay of Piglets and wondered why the British bothered. Residents of the island did not resist. They merely stood around and watched.
You have dreams. If you act, they will come true. To turn your dreams to a fact, it's up to you. If you have the soul and the spirit, never fear it, you'll see it through. Trust can inspire the heart with their fire, for the strong obey when a strong man shows them the way. Give me some men who are stout-hearted men who will fight for the right they adore. Start me with 10 who are stout-hearted men, and I'll soon give you 10,000 more. Then there's nothing in the world can halt the Marathon. When stout-hearted men can stick together,
Good night, Chet.
People were astounded and confused and wondered what in the world their government was up to. The British papers played the story in big black headlines, but beneath the headlines, the papers were laughing at what one of them called the Great Leaflet Landing. But the British government takes it all very seriously. They're convinced that gangster types with a lot of money, some of them Americans, who feel that Anguilla is a plum ripe for the picking, have moved in and taken control of the island. The British people say, so what? But the British government insists that instability in Anguilla could spread like a cancer through the whole Caribbean, affecting the interests not only of Great Britain, but also of the United States. That's why they invaded, to restore law and order, and to put Anguilla back on the road to some kind of political stability. But the British people don't really care about the political stability of Anguilla. They're very simply embarrassed that the British Empire has been reduced to invading a small island in the Caribbean. This is Bill Butel, ABC News, London.
Another small country that is embarrassing another world power is Peru. Peruvian Navy ships reportedly... British troops today landed on the little Caribbean island of Anguilla and took control without a shot being fired. All 6,000 Anguillans are tonight being governed by a British commissioner. A report now from ABC's Peter Jennings.
British troops took very little time getting to the island from their base in England. After arriving on the island of Antigua, about 100 miles away, they boarded 2 British frigates and steamed overnight to Anguilla. Even as these men were boarding their ships and preparing their weapons, most observers here thought they really would constitute only an offshore threat to the rebel Anguillan government. It was not to be so, for in the pre-dawn hours of darkness, the paratroopers took off from the 2 British ships in helicopters. In no time they had landed and taken armed control. The troops rapidly assured the islanders that they would not have to return to the 3-island federation from which they seceded 2 years ago. A British commissioner has been appointed instead. The breakaway island's president didn't even know the troops had landed. He awoke this morning to the sight of the ships in his British islands cove. The islanders themselves were at first more amazed than angry. They really couldn't believe it was happening. How, they asked, could the British invade an island of 6,000 people with no phones and no electricity and hardly enough money to buy a radio, let alone weapons to defend themselves? It won't be long before the troops leave, but before they do, they'll be replaced by a detachment of British police who will maintain law and order. The new commissioner, in a message to the people, said it might take a couple of years to straighten